Facing cancer doesn't mean you are now only the cancer patient. So often we hear those with cancer share the need to feel seen, to feel understood, and not feel alone. So whether you are facing cancer yourself or supporting someone who is, join us. My name is Susan Larkin. We are Facing Cancer Together. Navigating stage 4 cancer, facing cancer as a Black woman, grieving, and dried up raisins. Michelle Audoin is here to talk about it all and how she ended up revealing more than she thought she ever would. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. Did you want to introduce yourself so everyone knows the amazing person they're listening to?
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a mother of 2 kids. I'm 47 years old, and back in 2017, I was diagnosed de novo with stage 4 breast cancer.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. You were telling me when you were first diagnosed, they really thought it was, stage 0. It was, quote, I don't like this phrase, but quote, the good cancer. What happened after that?
You know what, Sue? Those were the exact words that were used. It was a lump that I knew that I previously had. I was told that I just had lumpy breasts and I had nothing to worry about. And then there's your intuition, that nagging feeling at the back of your mind that just says, do something about this, do something about this. So I had put it off for a while. Went for a biopsy. The ultrasound showed that there may be something suspicious, but the biopsy came back as stage 0, the good cancer. That's what I was told. And for some people, that's good enough. But for me, it wasn't. And it's also because my story and my journey with breast cancer started at a very early age. There was the 14-year-old me who had her first breast tumor removed at such a young age, the age of 14, that left a raised scar on my right areola. And I carried that shame and the pain of that experience with me all of my life. So when somebody says to me, you've got the good kind of cancer, stage 0, for me, it wasn't good at all. It was just almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This fear, this shame that I carried for all these years materialized. And so I needed to do something more with it than just sit with it and say that it was stage 0. I wanted to take my health care into my own hands and do something more.
And when you were advocating for yourself, when you were asking questions, that's exhausting. That's mentally tiring. How did you kind of keep motivating yourself to ask those questions and keep, I don't like the phrase good cancer, and I refuse to use the word pushing. You are advocating for yourself and you're speaking up. How do you keep yourself motivated to do that? Because it's exhausting.
It is absolutely exhausting. And I just had to know that my voice mattered and my experience mattered. So I am the expert in my body and my feelings. And something just wasn't feeling right about this stage 0 diagnosis. Although I looked perfectly healthy and I wasn't feeling anything otherwise, I also needed to honor that 14-year-old girl inside me. And so I advocated for a bilateral mastectomy, even though I was told it was the good cancer and there was only stage 0 in one breast, in the left breast. I knew that what I needed to do for me, and that was to remove both of my breasts. So initially, I was told we should look at salvaging my breast and do just a lumpectomy, because a radical mastectomy is not something that they usually do for somebody with an early stage diagnosis. But that just didn't sit well with me. And so I did end up having the lumpectomy. It was just because surgeon and plastic surgeons couldn't coordinate their schedules. But lo and behold, after the lumpectomy, they realized that there was more that was going on in my left breast than they'd anticipated, things that were not picked up in the mammogram. because I had dense breasts, which I did not know ahead of time. And so when we went ahead with the full mastectomy, we realized that there was actually a little bit in one of my lymph nodes also. So that upgraded from stage 0 to stage 2. Stage 2, I was told it's still the good kind of cancer, highly treatable. We wouldn't probably need chemotherapy. I still pushed. I went to see a radiation oncologist just for a second opinion on treatment. And later that day, I got a phone call from the radiation oncologist. And he said to me, "We're going to have to put this on pause, Michelle. We saw something in your lungs and in your neck. You've got to investigate." I really wasn't expecting this. And we went to do the biopsies, and it came back as it was actually my breast cancer all along was never stage 0, it was stage 4. I just didn't present with any symptoms. No cough, no short of breath, no wheezing. And I was also diagnosed with thyroid cancer at the same time.
And at the time, while all this is going on, you've got a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old. So you're still nursing at this stage. And you've got a 10-year-old as well. That's such different stages of children, like in terms of child development. How did you approach talking to and this topic with your kids?
It's a little bit easier to have the conversations about cancer with a 10-year-old because in the school system, we all honor and recognize our national hero, Terry Fox. And we know what a champion he was for cancer. And so when I was told that it was the early stage, this is what everybody hopes for. And that was the message that I brought to my daughter was, Mommy has cancer. The doctors say it's the good kind. They're going to take it all out and everything will be fine. And so those were the initial conversations that we had. And that was enough to satisfy her and to have faith in the system that was looking after me. When my diagnosis shifted and we realized that it was stage 4, that was where the challenges began. Because as much as everyone admires Terry Fox, we also know that he wasn't able to complete his marathon of hope because his disease had progressed and eventually he succumbed to his cancer diagnosis. So you can just only imagine the tension, the uncertainty, the questions, the fear in a 10-year-old's mind when they find out that their mom has stage 4 cancer, that the doctors are going to treat it, but there is no cure. And so that was a really, really difficult time to be vulnerable, but to also be honest. Then there's my 2-year-old, who at the time didn't have language. I was still nursing him. And so my relationship with him was very much the mothering, the nurturing, being home with him, picking him up. It was very much a physical relationship. So I didn't need to really talk to him about my breast cancer because it just wouldn't make sense to him. But I had to sever that bond, that nursing immediately. I had the biopsies and then my breasts were in pain. And then, you're having all these dyes and things injected into you. So without being able to explain to him what was going on, he just felt that he couldn't be close to his mother. And that comfort that I provided for him was taken away from him. And so that was also very difficult. So having conversations with my 10-year-old about mommy's cancer not being curable, and then not being able to comfort my son in the ways that he needed me most. It was a really difficult time for our family.
Yeah. And as your son is aged, I'm trying to do math quickly. He's 8 now.
He's
so
8.
He has his language and his understanding and all of this is developed as you've continued on your cancer journey. How do you have those conversations, or has it become this is what happens in our family? I have appointments. This is like, how do you kind of navigate as he matures those conversations?
Yeah, I'm very open about it. Um, I try to keep my emotions in check first. So I take care of me, and then I realize that I can take care of them. It's like, when you're on the airplane, you put your oxygen mask on yourself first, then you take care of the people around you. That's what dealing with this diagnosis is like. So over the years, Noah has come to develop more language and understanding of cancer. And he's gone through the education system and also understands Terry Fox. So there's a lot more curiosity and questions. In the early stages after my reconstruction, he would comment about why my breasts looked different than his chest. And it was because my nipples had been removed. And so that was a reminder to him, oh, there's something different about my mommy. She has cancer. What did the cancer do? It took away her breasts. The doctors did that to help her live longer. And so it's kind of like jumping in puddles. You're in it, and then you're out, and then they move on. So their curiosity has been satisfied, or the questions have been answered, and they're ready to move on. And so we just keep doing that. So, after I have my scans and I've taken care of myself, whatever the results may be, then I can have a conversation with the kids. And a lot of times these conversations with my son are when we're snuggling at bed, after we've read and we're in our bedtime routine. And then he talks and he asks really vulnerable, open questions with curiosity. And I try to answer as honestly as I can in age appropriate ways.
Yeah. And you're a teacher by training.
I am a teacher by training.
And practice. Does that help, do you think, in having those conversations? Do you draw a bit upon what you learned in your education and your experience as a teacher?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did a lot of studies in childhood development. So all of those are tools in my toolkit in order to, talk to kids at age appropriate levels and understand also emotionally what they're going through and try to help, anticipate their needs and what I can do to set things up for them.
That's great. I know we were having a wonderful conversation with a woman who runs an organization called Nankind, and they have child life specialists who help families, and she was talking about sometimes kids get angry. Kids get angry either at just the world, the cancer, whatever that might be. I loved your analogy of putting your oxygen mask on first, but anger can sometimes come out quickly, especially when you've got kids entering into puberty and all of the things going on in their world. How do you manage that? Or has that come up?
You know what? I talk to my kids about there's no such thing as negative emotions. They're allowed to feel what they're feeling, and I don't place a value or a judgment on their emotions in those moments. So if they're sad, if they're angry, if they're frustrated, if they're anxious, those aren't negative emotions. It's just how they're feeling, and it's usually connected to something. So I just try to be aware and give them that space. But I also realize that sometimes they need to have space for their own that's without me. And so part of it has been for me to reach out to other organizations that can support them. So at the very early stages, when I couldn't lift up my son and I was recovering from my mastectomy, I reached out to Nankind and was gifted with lovely nannies to come over and spend time with the kids, and that gave them a sense of normalcy and something to look forward to, and other community agencies like Gilda's Club, tapping into them also to their children's programming, just to give the kids a sense of community that they're not alone. Their mom is not the only one living with this diagnosis, that they can learn to cope and talk about their feelings and have those experiences validated by a group of their peers, people who just get it.
That's great. And this idea, to your point, those of us who grew up through the Canadian school system, it was all about Terry Fox. And that was kind of our first understanding of cancer. Now, this idea of stage 4, this idea of living with cancer as a chronic illness, this is new-ish to society. It's new kind of in that public space if you're not in this space. And it's not just your kids that are part of your community. It's everyone around you. When you talk about stage 4, living with cancer, how do you manage that in a world that not everyone understands what that is? And what are some of those challenges and how do you handle it?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. When I'm no longer working, um, and so that's one of the big challenges, that when you get a stage 4 uh, cancer diagnosis, there's a lot of instability. There's a lot of treatments, appointments, specialists that you're going to see, and so it just throws the balance of your life out the window, out the door, everywhere. It's just there's no balance. And so that's the first hurdle, is just trying to process this massive upheaval. And then there's the idea of what cancer looks like, and that we can all be survivors if we just run for the cure, if we just put on pink and we shout from the rooftops and cheer each other on, it's going to get better. Unfortunately, that's not the reality for people living with stage 4 cancer. It's treatable, but it's not curable. So somebody who's got an earlier stage diagnosis, they might get hit up with the heavy chemo. They might have, a lot of rounds of radiation, but treatment ends and they can recover.
Mm-hmm.
There's a survivorship aspect to it afterwards, because you've still been through a lot, and that's very much a traumatic experience. But somebody with a stage 4 diagnosis, that treatment doesn't end. The treatments continue until that treatment is no longer successful. And that means that the disease has progressed, you've got new tumors, or your tumors are growing. So you're always on treatment. You're always going into appointments. You're always going in for scans. So when I meet somebody for the first time and they say, "What do you do?" And I say to them, I'm a full-time cancer patient. A lot of times they're in shock, because their first reaction is, "But you don't look sick. You look so good. You must be doing great." And there's that awkward moment of, what do I do with that? What do I do with that?
What do you do with that?
I see it as an opportunity to educate people a little bit more about the needs and the challenges of people living with metastatic cancer. So yes, I'm happy when people will respond and say, "You don't look sick," because it means that my doctors are doing their job, and that treatment and care for metastatic cancer is advancing in the direction that we need to. So we need medicine that will keep our cancer at bay, that provides a good quality of life. And that good quality of life is the side effect management. And so the other education piece is that I may not look sick on the outside, but a lot of what I'm living with my stage 4 diagnosis, are the things that you cannot see. It's the anxiety, it's the stress, it's the fatigue. Could be nausea, it could be diarrhea, it could be upset stomach, just inability to digest certain foods. Um, those things you can't see, and that's what people don't understand when you meet somebody. Yes, maybe my hair hasn't fallen out yet. Go through periods of thinning. I'm aware of it. Maybe you're not. It affects my self worth. The chronic fatigue, trying to be a mom who's active with her kids. You can't see my fatigue. I feel it. So there's a lot of education that's going on. And I think it's important for people to understand that.
Michelle, you were mentioning that you look at it as an opportunity to educate people about what living with cancer means, what stage 4 means. You've also done a ton of advocacy for Black women facing cancer. Do you want to talk a bit about what drove you to that and some of the amazing work you've been doing in that space?
Yes. Navigating a breast cancer diagnosis is really challenging. What I wasn't prepared for was the challenges of navigating it as a Black woman. And the biggest challenge and barrier for me was the lack of images and representation of different kinds of people with breast cancer. So what came to me was that breast cancer is an older white woman's disease. And so as I was meeting with my care team and trying to make decisions about my breast reconstruction, I had really serious concerns about scars and scar management. And that all related and goes back to that 14-year-old girl who had this raised scar on her areola from having her first breast cyst removed. And I didn't want to have those kinds of scars. I didn't want to feel shamed and embarrassed about my body any longer. And so I had really specific questions about, how are we going to do this? Are these going to heal as keloids? What are we going to do? How are the scars going to fade? Am I going to look like Frankenstein? And I wanted to see images of other women who looked like me, who had their breasts reconstructed. And the images weren't there. I would ask and I would be told things like, don't worry, just trust us. These things always look better on Black women. Not the right thing to say. I felt like I was a patient who was really engaged, and I did my due diligence. I would read all the brochures, go to all the information sessions in the hospitals, and all of those things are set up as policies and procedures because they know that when patients are engaged in their care and they're informed and they ask questions, the results are better. But here I was asking all of these questions and I wasn't getting the answers that I needed. And so it made it really hard for me to accept my diagnosis and to move forward and have faith in somebody who's going to be doing surgery on me, a life-altering, physically altering surgery, and not know what the results were going to be and how they were going to manage those results. It's like if you want to go buy a car and you go into the dealership and you say, hey, I'm looking for this kind of car. And they're like, we don't have it in stock. We don't have any pictures of it, but trust us. It's the best car for you. Would you go to that car shop and buy your car? No, you wouldn't. Mm-mm. You would want to check under the hood and see it and ask questions and touch it and smell it. And I was denied all of that because nobody had those images of Black women. And so that threw me into depression. So yes, I had this surgery. Yes, I went through with it. But I just couldn't accept my reconstructed breasts. I saw my body as everything above the chest and everything below the chest. And I could never look at my reconstructed breasts. So my body image was completely skewed. And it just led to depression. And at some point, as I was processing my depression and just writing about all of my feelings, Sue, I sort of like shifted from being angry and upset to thinking, wait a minute. What if my sister's diagnosed? What if my cousins are diagnosed? What if my nieces, my daughters, my son, what if they're diagnosed with breast cancer? Is their experience going to be any better or any different than mine? And that's when I thought, what would I want for somebody else who looks like me to have in this experience? And I just started jotting those things down. And that already in itself, the act of journaling and thinking what I wanted to see differently, made me feel better. And so I continued to do that. And I just called it like my little breast recognition project. And I just kind of just sat with it, just hoping that someday there would be an opportunity to do something with it. And then in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, and there was a lot of awakening, a reckoning of, social injustice. And there were a lot of companies coming out and putting out statements about how we value diversity and equity and we support, Black lives. And some of it just didn't ring true to me. It wasn't my experience with these organizations or these people. And so the only way for me to process that was just, again, to write out my feelings. And so I started sending out emails and writing letters. And most of the time people would just reply back and just with the regular platitudes, like, thank you for writing, we do this and this and this. And it just, again, it just was hollow and insincere. And then Rethink Breast Cancer wrote back. They actually picked up the phone and called me, and I was already a member of their online community. And they said, "We want to hear more." And so I was just offloading a whole lot of my feelings. And then at the end, I said to the founder, I said, "I have this idea. Like, it's unrelated to what we're talking about, but it relates to my experience as a Black woman." And I said, like, there just weren't these images, and somehow we've got to do something. And this is my dream. I want to create a community or a resource or something that can support Black women so that we see ourselves and we know what to expect and we know what questions to ask. That community doesn't exist for us. And so from that's how Uncovered was born.
And do you want to describe Uncovered?
Oh, Uncovered is amazing. Uncovered is an online digital resource, and it's also a print resource. And it shines a light on the disparities and discrepancies that exist when navigating a cancer diagnosis for Black women, Indigenous, and people of color. So it's got beautiful images and authentic stories of women sharing what it is like to go through a breast cancer experience.
And you are one of the images. You're photographed
Yes.
in that
Yeah.
resource.
So yes, it started with me. So I was the very first person to get photographed for this resource. And it's kind of funny, Sue, when I think about it, because even though it was my idea and I needed it to happen, it was very much a cathartic process. It filled that cathartic need for me, you know. But when the day came to actually go to the photo shoot, I was petrified. I almost wanted to back out. I felt like I could not do this because I had not accepted my body for it was. I didn't like my reconstructed breast. I didn't like my body at all. So here I was, literally going to uncover my breasts for a bunch of strangers to make that experience more, a little bit. I wanted to create a safe environment doing this. So what was important for me was to have Black creatives on site. So we had a Black photographer, Black hairstylist, Black makeup artists to make sure that this was an inclusive and supportive environment for all the women who were participating. So in that first year, there were 8 of us, and I was the first one on set. And I thought I was going to faint.
Oh.
I was just so scared. But after the first few photos, when the photographer turned the camera around, I really saw my body as a whole, and I saw the beauty and strength that was there all along.
So
And
when you look in the mirror now, can you look at your whole body, head to toe?
I can look my whole body head to toe and see myself as beautiful and whole as I am.
That's beautiful. It's a beautiful resource. It's just stunning. It's a stunning, emotionally and visually. It's a beautiful resource.
And I can just add that it's also available free online. So anybody can go to rethinkbreastcancer.com/uncovered and you can read the stories and see what it's all about. And an important part of Uncovered is that it's a huge support for those communities that are underserved and underrepresented, but it's also an opportunity for anyone who works in healthcare to look at the issues and say, hey, there's something we can do here.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the second edition of Uncovered, there's a call to action, a wish list of various items that the women of Uncovered we compiled together. And it's for anybody. So Uncovered, yes, it's a community and a movement, but it's also for anybody who works in healthcare to take notice of and be the change that we need to see in this world.
That's incredible. When you mentioned your 14-year-old self and having your tumor removed then, you mentioned this moment of having to stop nursing your son, as well as this moment, this time when you were in a depression and you couldn't look at your body. There's a lot of grief. There's so much grieving that those 3 incidents and everything else in between. How do you move through that? What does that look like for you?
Ooh, Well, first of all, like the process of grief or just grieving anything, it's not linear. Like,
Yeah.
you have the diagnosis and I'm grieving the life that I once had. That there was that Michelle before her cancer diagnosis and then the life that she's got now with all this uncertainty. So I'm trying to grieve that. There was my education family, my community, the school that I worked with, the teachers, like that all ended. Um, there was the grief of processing losing my breasts. And in doing so, that connection that I had with my son, like where's the space to say, yes, I know I have cancer and this is a medical decision to have my breast removed, but there's also like a human inside me and there's a mom who's nursing her baby and her baby wants his mother to hold him the way he used to and she can't. And so I'm grieving that and then grieving, like what does this mean for my energy and my ability to interact with my kids? There's so much grief. Um, and so it's realizing that it's not linear. Like it didn't stop when the mastectomy and the reconstruction ended. Like that grief is ongoing, and it's just finding different ways to process it and have outlets for it. And so I think a lot of my advocacy work helps give me some meaning in my life with a diagnosis that makes absolutely no sense. Like what? There is no good cancer. I don't look at it as a gift, but I see this opportunity to be an advocate and educate people as a way to give meaning in my life.
Yeah. I love that idea that it's non-linear. I think that there's days and there's moments in days and stretches of time that we have to go through all of that. And it sounds like you give yourself permission to, I love, it's the same as when you were talking about the kids. There's no negative emotions. They're just how you're feeling.
True. And there's different kinds of grief. We just seem to talk about grief as grief. But there's the traumatic grief of going through the cancer diagnosis and having the mastectomy and understanding that you've got cancer. But there's also the anticipatory grief. And a lot of people who live with a metastatic diagnosis, you're scanned fairly frequently and you get blood draws very frequently. And so you're always living in these little bubbles. So if my scans are every 3 months, maybe I'll get a clear scan or no evidence of anything suspicious or tumors growing or everything is stable. So I've got a month where I'm living high on that. I'm feeling great. Month 2, I know that my scans are coming up. And then in the third month, in the weeks and even days, leading up to that scan, it's that anticipatory grief, like what if something bad happens? What if, and then just wondering, that the uncertainty, like if something does show up in this, what does it mean for my family and my lifestyle, my quality of life? So I'm constantly navigating different kinds of grief at the same time.
Wow. Part of your treatment meant you went into menopause instantly, straight into menopause. You were 40 something years old,
Early 40s. Yeah, I'm 47 years.
So what did your care team say to you about that? Like tell us a bit about that.
Oh my gosh. So my cancer is fed by estrogen. So there's different types of cancer. So breast cancer is not just one diagnosis. And as cancer treatments and researchers advance, they learn so much more about cancer biology. So my cancer is fed by estrogen. As a woman who's had kids and was nursing, lots of estrogen in my body. One of the things that we needed to do was suppress my ovaries, which were producing estrogen. So first it was injections in my abdomen. When we realized that that was not enough, I actually had to have my ovaries and tubes removed. And I went from a woman who had a kid, was having regular, periods, to all of a sudden I'm full on postmenopausal. And so when I talked to my care team about that, they said to me, oh, well, you should just expect, menopausal-like symptoms. And at first I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then I went home and I thought, wait a minute, I have no idea what that means. How should I know? Why would I know? I'm in my early 40s. I don't know what menopause feels like. And I kind of felt like I was navigating this alone.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have that perimenopause phase where your periods kind of phase out. You might feel hot flashes.
And you get to complain with your girlfriends and find out what they're going through.
Yes. And what do they do for it? And it was just like, it was like hit me like a brick wall, you know, mood swings, hot flashes, decreased libido, all the vaginal dryness. Like I was just told I went to see a specialist and they're like, yeah, you're shriveled up. You're just like a little raisin. And I was like, what do I do with that? I still want to have some pleasure in my life, but man, like when you're being described that way, you're like, I don't know. What is the point?
Dried up raisin doesn't really get things going, does it?
It doesn't. No, that doesn't sound sexy at all.
Mm-mm. And that's common. So that is a common treatment for many women facing cancer, is this instant menopause.
It is. And so I think we're at a really interesting moment in cancer because that idea that cancer was an old white woman's disease is shifting. We know that certain cancers target certain women, especially young Black women, triple negative breast cancer, higher incidence. So maybe more of these women are experiencing these menopausal-like symptoms at a younger age, in the prime of their life, their childbearing years. And so we're having to make these decisions. So that whole idea of survivorship isn't just for those people who've moved on and finished treatment. It's for those young people like me who are living with a metastatic disease and are still young. And how do we navigate this menopausal body when we're still so young? And we do need better supports in place to help us deal with that, instead of just assuming that we know what it's like to have menopause. Like we're not amongst our peers in this. We're on our own. And so we just need a little bit more support to navigate that. Open up those conversations.
Yeah. Michelle, thank you for sharing your story with us today. Check out the episode description for a link to more of Michelle's story, as well as the link to Uncovered. What to eat during treatment. Does just hearing that phrase cause stress? Are well-meaning friends and family overwhelming you with links to helpful articles? Listen to our next episode with registered dietitian Denise Gabrielson to find out what she shares with her patients. Please share the Facing Cancer Together podcast with anyone in your life facing a cancer diagnosis or caring for someone who is. And if you're interested in learning more about Look Good, Feel Better and our workshops, visit us at lgfb.ca.
This is Story Studio Network.